also all of that radiant heat that comes off of the glass. So you can see on the screen is that there are some really hot temperatures that we're working with. The furnace itself, let's see, yeah, you guys might be able to feel this one. This runs at about 2100 degrees. Can you guys feel that? So you can feel that already radiating that heat all the way across the studio. We also have, on the screen, you'll see what that actually looks like inside of the furnaces. We have 2 of these furnaces. There's one on this side as well. And inside each of these furnaces is another pot, another sort of container that actually holds all of the hot glass inside of it. Each of our furnaces holds about 1,000 pounds of glass. And in order to keep that level high, we sort of alternate back and forth on which furnaces we use and which furnaces we charge. And we charge, what that means is that we refill the furnace with new glass. Let's see if I can find a piece real quick. So we use pieces of glass called cullet. Now cullet is manufactured. It looks like ice cubes. And we fill the furnaces with these little ice cubes. And these ice cubes are made for us already, so we don't have to mix all of the chemistry and all of the different powdered chemicals. Sort of like we did in the classroom where we added the salt and the other chemicals, where we were working with basically a little bit of powdered stuff. We don't want to work with that. We want to work with these nice clean pieces of cullet, and that way we don't breathe in any of that dust. That's another way that we keep ourselves safe, is by using some things that are already pre-made for us. So that's a little bit about some of those things. What else do you guys notice? Hey, you see us on our big screen up there? So what are some other things that you see around the hot shop that you think might help keep us safe? Let's see, somebody I haven't heard from yet. Something to keep us safe? Okay. What are some other facilities or things that you see or equipment that you see on the hot shop floor that you're interested in and curious about? Anybody? All right, well, we're going to show you a couple of little things about some of the glass that we do. If I drop the microphone, I need both hands. So if you look at some of the images of Lino's work, you can actually identify where some of those things started out as pieces of cane, of Marini. So to do that, we create a long, some people sort of think of it as, has anybody had a Twinkie before? So a Twinkie, or like a cinnamon roll, has anybody had a cinnamon roll? So to make a cinnamon roll, you take a big sheet and you roll it up on top of itself, and then you cut it into slices, and every slice looks exactly the same. That's what we have here, where this long tube has been cut into slices, and it keeps that same sort of shape and pattern in every single slice. We can then use that to actually make a work of art that has a lot of intricate details and a lot of really cool patterns. What are some other questions you guys might have? Somebody I haven't heard from yet. Yeah, we have 5 minutes. Is that good? Yes. All right, so the decoration comes sort of all the time. So there are different places and different ways that we can decorate the glass. We can add color to it, and also, like, really the main place that we work is at these benches. So these benches are sort of our main spot where we sit here and we with the pipe. That way we can get the tools that actually shape the glass. But for us, we can also work a little bit closer to you guys so you have a little bit of a better view of what we're working on. Yeah. So how do people become a glassblower? There are a lot of different ways to become any type of artist. One way is to start taking just sort of a hobby class on your own. There are a number of different studios in the area that offer beginner classes, introduction classes. David got his start over at Hilltop Artists, which is actually a school program that has glass blowing as part of the program. And that's at a couple of schools. There's a lot more in Washington than there are in just about any other state where actual high schools have glass blowing available. Hey David, what's the youngest for Hilltop? 12 years old, so yeah. I don't know, I can find out, yeah. It's down here in the Hilltop area, so I'll find out some details for you. So David got his start by going through the Hilltop program. He's also continued his education by going to places like the very famous glass school Pilchuck, which is just north of Seattle in Stanwood. He's also learned by practicing. Just like any other artistic form, the more that you make artwork, the more that you learn how to do different things, like make these really cool flowers. No. Nope. Yeah, you definitely do not have to go to Italy. There are lots of places to learn here in the States. I think so. So after David finishes pulling this flower, you guys are going to be heading on to the gallery. So you guys get to go take a look at some artwork that some of it's actually been made right here in our hot shop. And you can find out with some of these artists how they became artists, how they learned and practiced their works. Yeah. What's that? Do we have to what? Yeah. Yeah, come on down to the front row. All right. Yeah, go ahead. You may want to scoot in a little bit more. Keep on coming down. If you want to keep scooting out so more people can join us on the front row. All the way down to the front row, guys. Yep, go ahead and take a seat. Hi. I remember you guys. Yeah. All right, do you guys want to hop up the slide that way? We have a lot of them all over the place. Go ahead and take a seat, take a seat. All right. Hi, everybody. Oh, I'll wait for a second. Let me try that again. Good morning, everybody. That's what I like to see, like to hear. Glad to have you guys back. Welcome to the Museum of Glass Hot Shop. We're here with my friend David. David over there. So David and I are working in a very cool place. This is the Hot Shop. This is where we have something like 30 or 40 visiting artists every year. We have lots of people come through here and make all sorts of amazing works of art. Today our Hot Shop team is off-site, so it's just David and I down here. We get to show you a couple of really cool demonstrations and really cool techniques that have to do with glass making and how we stay safe in the glass studio. I think that's a pretty important thing. So we talked a little bit in the classroom about some of the safety procedures that we need to know as scientists. What do you think some of the safety rules in a hot shop need to be? What do you guys think? When you're in this space, what do you think we might want to be prepared for? Yeah. Absolutely. So we always sort of assume that everything has the potential of being hot. So we want to make sure that we're very cautious about what we touch and when we touch it. Obviously, these things that are glowing, they're very, very hot. So we definitely don't reach our hands in there. We also have a couple of things that help protect us from all of the heat. Are you doing the bubble, or do we still want to pull a little? Okay. Okay, excellent. Do you want to talk for a little bit? I'll grab the... So when we pull different pieces of cane, we can use those in a couple of different ways. One is to make stripes that go up and down the side of a vase or an object that we're working on. Another way is that we can cut them. Has anybody made cinnamon rolls before? Has anybody had a cinnamon roll before? So to make a cinnamon roll, you take a big sheet and you roll it up. And then when you cut it, every single cinnamon roll has the same spiral pattern on it. When we're working with Marini, we do the exact same thing. We make a long, narrow piece of glass. It has a pattern on the inside of it. So when we break it into small tiles, we can actually create patterns like what Lino Tagliapietra has set up on this plate right here. So each one of those has a really intricate pattern on the inside of it. That's Lino himself. He'll be back here tomorrow and Sunday and making works of art like that. So on this image, you can actually see some of those pieces of cane, all of those lines, those all come from adding different canes of colored glass to them. Aren't those beautiful? Those are really, really big pieces, and he's had a career of something like 70 years of making glass. He's a really important figure in the glass-making world. Yeah. What's that thing? That is, I don't know what exactly they're using that for. Sometimes we use that to shape different parts of the glass. Yeah. So, what does the furnace do? Fantastic question. Let me show you guys a couple of things. So, there is a big sign right over top over here that says furnace. We have 2 furnaces inside of this hot shop. Each one holds about 1,000 pounds of glass. Inside, you can see the diagram on the screen up at the top. There is another sort of pot inside of this furnace that holds all of that liquid glass. Now, you guys on the front row know that heat is one of the ways that we see energy, and that energy can be transferred over space, right? You guys ready for this? The temperature, we hold our glass at about 2,100 degrees, so when I open this up, do you guys feel that? That's pretty impressive, isn't it? And of course, I don't want you guys to feel left out, so we also have our glory hole. Our glory hole, take your time, David, no worries. Our glory holes are a little bit hotter than our furnaces, actually. So when we open this up, you guys on this side might be able to feel some of that heat come your way, too. Pretty amazing, right? So the glory holes, unlike the furnaces that actually hold glass, the glory holes are really just a big barrel on its side with a lot of fire coming into the side of it. Those gas burners burn natural gas. They get very, very hot. We like that because we need to always reheat our glass. Glass cools down in about 2 minutes before it's too difficult to work with, so we constantly have to reheat. Ed Schmidt, one of the really famous glass-blowing instructors, always has this saying, heat good, cold bad, and just keep reminding yourself that when you're working with glass. Other questions that you guys have? Yeah. Who, David? Oh, the guy on the side? I don't know. He's been there for a long time. He's just a mascot, I guess. I don't know. What else? Yes, sir. Yeah, natural gas. There are different furnace designs that actually recapture the hot exhaust and refuel it with that as a recycler. Ours, it stays pretty moderate, and we regulate the gas flow to make sure that it stays at the right temperature. So David's working on something that we call hot sculpting. He's using a pair of tweezers, and he's just working that glass directly. I don't know, we'll have to find out. We'll have to watch and see what he's coming up with. So David's going to pull out one of his different tools. This is called the diamond shears. Those are like really big scissors that have sort of a hole in the middle of them. We use that to sort of grab the glass in different ways. So one of the things that glass blowers do fairly regularly is a lot of times when we're working with very large objects, we start thinking about things in very big terms. Making small things like pulling a pony, like you see the screen up on top, one of the things that we do is to practice our hand skills. Make sure that we're still focused on the little details. So you'll notice that when, is this Nick or Gabe doing this? Oh, it's Nick. So as you notice, when Nick is working on this, glass likes to move where it's the hottest. So he sort of works backwards, working from the head and then going back towards where the pipe is, where that heat is still held by the glass. You also notice that when he stretches it, the glass also becomes thinner and thinner as he stretches. Just like when David and I pull a piece of cane or a piece of tubing down here, it stretches, it becomes thinner. Yeah. So it doesn't break while it's thin because it's still flexible and still hot. As glass warms up, it becomes a fluid, it moves. So because it's flexible, it's not as brittle as cold glass. Cold glass, it shatters and it shears because it's under tension. What are some other questions you guys have? Yeah. So the inside of a glass cup, you mean like which part, like just the decoration or like the air? Okay, so great question. So when we're making a cup, we actually blow a bubble and then we create what we call a jack line. So that bubble, when you're using a cup that's been hand blown, you're holding a bubble, basically. We've just cut off the top for you. So if you think of a balloon or a bubble that you might blow out of gum, if you take the top off of that, you're left with a bowl or a cup. We take that bowl or cup and we just reshape it so it's the right form that we think would make a good cup, bowl, vessel, vase, whatever it might be. Yeah. So windows, there are a couple of different ways to make windows. Traditionally, one of the oldest ways to make windows is to take a very large gather of glass and to spin it out into a big flat plate and then cut out squares from that big flat plate. One of the other ways that we can do it is to create a very large cylinder and then cut it down the side and then unfold it and basically make it lay flat. The windows that you most likely see is actually a totally different way of making glass. They actually float it on a bed of hot molten tin, a metal. And that's a very big industrial process. They make huge sheets of glass that way. What's next, David? Yeah, perfect. So the color of glass that we add to it comes from a couple of different forms. Now, in the classroom, we worked with a couple of different sheets of metal, right? We had the copper and the steel, right? When we added chemistry to that, it changed colors. What color did the copper sheet turn? Anybody remember? Yeah, it was sort of like sort of turquoisey green. And what color did the stainless steel turn? Brown red, right? So those are two different chemicals. One is copper oxide. The other one is ferric oxide or iron oxide. Those are two different colors that we can use. Now, to add color to a piece of glass, we use light bulbs are made out of glass, and they're made in a very similar way. They use a mold, and they blow thin glass into it. Now, to add color to some of these pieces, we use things like color rod. We don't want to mess with all of those metal oxides because we don't want to breathe them in. We don't want to be exposed to them. So we use things like this. This is a glass rod that has a metal oxide mixed into the glass already. We can heat this up, and then we can drop it over top of a bubble, sort of like what David's working on. That's one way to do it. We can also add it by taking rods of glass like that and breaking it down into small little chips called frit. So on the screen, you can see that we take this hot piece of colored glass and we do an overlay. We just drip it right on top of a bubble of glass, and that creates a thin layer of color over the entire object. The colors almost always come from metal oxides. So cupric oxide, chromium oxide, cobalt, cadmium oxide. There's even some gold colors that can make some really beautiful ruby reds. So David's going to come back over. He's going to take those. That's a pair of jacks. Jacks are sort of the handy tool for multi-purpose use. So they're sort of like two bubbles. Sometimes we have different names for them. We might call it the neck, the body, the waistline, the neckline, the jack line, the foot. Some of them have these sort of body part names because we sort of keep it in order to know if we're working on the bottom or the top of the glass piece, the foot or the head. Yeah. A little bit louder. What, the bubble? So we gather a bubble of glass, we gather a glob of glass, and we blow air into it, and it expands. It's just like blowing up a balloon or blowing a bubble in your bubble gum. It's actually about the same amount of pressure, too. Glass moves a lot easier when it's hot, so as the glass cools down, it takes a lot more force to actually expand that bubble. Yes? Excellent. So the really big glass sculptures, the more times we gather glass and the more glass that we have to begin with, the bigger we can start creating those objects. We keep adding glass to them. Sometimes there might be 5 or 6 gathers of glass, and sometimes we can make those gathers really, really thick, too. Great. One more question? Yeah. So more glass into the sculpture. David would take something like this when it gets a little bit colder, dip right back into the furnace, gather glass all the way around it. So that would just be putting it back into that big pot of glass and just wrap it around. Pretty cool, huh? Hey V, if you could put up some pictures of Lino's work, if you're there. Hey, all right. Thank you. All right, go ahead, take a seat. Yeah, where you guys are just fine. All right, McMicken Elementary. Good afternoon yet? Afternoon. Good afternoon. Just barely. All right. That's a. All right. So, welcome to the Museum of Glass Hot Shop. You guys having an all right day so far? Making those connections between science and art? There you go, all right. So we're here in the Hot Shop. This is where we have a number of visiting artists every year. This is a working studio. This is a place where we actually get to meet live living artists that make incredible works of art. This week we have an artist named Lino Tagliapietra. He'll be back in tomorrow. He'll be back in on Sunday making some work. These are some of his things down here in the front row. So just be careful that you don't accidentally kick anything that's on the tables. We also have this really great space with an enormous facility where we get to actually make glass. There's a little bit of Lino on the top screen. You can see some of his work, and when you can come back and see him work. He's one of the best glass blowers, if not the glass blower in the world right now. We have a lot of respect for Lino. So there's a little bit of equipment in here. I remember talking with all of us talking together when I came to the school about some of the safety issues that we need to take in consideration. When we're working with science experiments, we also have to keep some of those same safety considerations in our mind when we're working in a glass studio. As you guys look around this space, what are some things that you notice that you think might need some safety precautions? What do you guys think? There are a lot of pretty big options, right? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. So all over the floor we have different sorts of cables and wires and materials that we need to be really careful that we don't accidentally trip on anything. You are absolutely right. That's why we like to make sure that we wear closed-toed shoes, that we're not wearing sandals or flip-flops. We want to make sure that we have good traction on them and that we're comfortable in our shoes. We are also very aware of what's around us. We need to make sure that we know where those cables are and we know where we need to be. Great observation. Yes? The glory hole, absolutely right. So right in the middle, we have this very large piece of equipment called the glory hole, or the reheating chamber. This reheating chamber is very, very hot. It's about 2,400 degrees. Now, we have some things in place that help us make sure that we don't get too hot. Now, a couple of these things are, of course, these doors that we have. These doors prevent us from overheating when we're close. We also have this really nice shield that David's holding. This protects us from some of the heat. Now, you guys on the front row, let me know when you feel this. Pretty amazing, right? That's all of that radiant heat. If you guys remember talking about the science of energy and how energy transfers from one place to another, that heat just moved all the way across the studio to warm you up. That's really, really hot, and trust me, when we're closer to it, it is much, much hotter. So there are a lot of physical barriers between us and the heat. We use things like the big metal shields, the handheld shields, the different sorts of paddles that we use to protect ourselves from the heat. When we work together in a glass-blowing team, we also make sure that we look out for one another. So while David's working on a piece of glass, I might come next to him with a paddle and protect his arms from that radiating, glowing heat from the glass that he's gathered. What are some other things that you guys notice that you think might be something that glass blowers need to be careful with? Yeah. Absolutely. A lot of it is just knowing where we are and making sure that there's plenty of space between us and anything that might be dangerous. Now, we do have to get really close to the glory holes, to the furnaces. We have to be right next to them in order to gather glass, in order to reheat our gather. You just saw David reach in and got what we call a gather of glass. So David's got a punty, and this little punty has just a little, right? Yeah. This punty is made out of stainless steel. It's a metal rod that holds a gather of glass on the end of it. Now, as you can see, this glass, it's pretty hot. Now, David has to constantly turn this metal rod in order to keep the glass what we call on center. We have to make sure that it's balanced and it's not dripping. One of the things about being aware of our space and our environment is that David needs to focus on doing that. If he gets distracted by talking to me or listening to me talk to you guys, that glass is now on the floor. And that can be a really dangerous problem for everybody. Now, David's actually, you just guys noticed that, right? He actually reached out and was able to touch part of this glass. Glass is a really good insulator. It doesn't necessarily hold heat for a super long amount of time. It protects us from that heat. In some ways, the thinner that it is, the more that it releases all of that heat energy, and the sooner that we can touch it. But a big glob of glass, this you can still see is glowing orange. It's still incredibly hot. What next, David? Bubble. All right. So one of the ways that glass artists actually start making and creating an object is by taking a gather of glass and adding an air bubble to it. So David's going to come over to this furnace. Again, that's running at about 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. And he's going to just spin that blowpipe inside of that hot glass. And that wraps hot molten glass all the way around the pipe that he's working on. And he's going to use one of the best tools in the studio, and that's called a marver. A marver is just this metal table that David's working on. You'll notice that it's made out of stainless steel. You guys learned a little bit about stainless steel when we melted those ice cubes, remember? Whoa. Did you guys see how that happened? Yeah, it's still hot. That's a good one, Dave. Hey! Yeah, it's a little toasty still. So we won't be able to pass it around or nobody will be able to touch it. That's pretty good. Pretty warm. You can also see how flexible it starts out to be. It does have a little bit of a bounce to it, but it's also very brittle. Once it gets to a breaking point, it does shatter completely. Yeah. Yeah. So inside of the furnace, both of our furnaces hold about 1,000 pounds of glass. So inside of the furnace is basically another pot. So there's the furnace, the outside container of it. Then inside of that is like a big bowl. And inside of that big bowl is that 1,000 pounds of glass. And that level slowly drops as we keep pulling glass from it. So that's why over at this second furnace, we actually have these 2 bins of glass. That's called cullet. We're getting ready to charge that furnace. We're going to be adding these little ice cubes of glass to our furnace, and that restocks all of the hot glass inside. So we have to make sure that we know what the level is. The farther down inside the furnace that is, the more difficult it is to get a gather of glass. But we need to know where that level is. It's kind of difficult to see as well because it's all glowing orange when you're inside. Okay, excellent. So David's going to grab another gather of glass. That's just what we call it. It's just a gather. So gathering is the process of sticking a punty or a blowpipe inside of the furnace. We wrap it around. Again, we just spin it, and that just sort of wraps that glass all the way around. And David's going to come right over here. Again, he's keeping an eye on the glass, turning it when he needs to. He's going to take one of the really important tools that glass artists use. This is a pair of tweezers. Tweezers are really good for hot sculpting, which is exactly what David's doing right now. He's taking different parts of those tweezers, sometimes using the sides, sometimes using the points, the tips. How's it going? What's that? Oh, yeah, that's it. So the nice thing about flowers is that they're organic shapes, so we get a little bit of flexibility with them. Flowers come in all shapes and sizes, and if they look close enough, that's good enough for us. Some animals and some things that are hot sculpted need to look very precise. Yeah, this is just a punty. This is just the solid rod. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. what we're going to do is the question was, what happens if you make a rose like that and then blow a bubble into it? So we're going to give it a try and see what happens. What do you guys think? What are some hypotheses? What are some predictions about what might happen? What do you guys think? Everybody, who's got an idea? Who's got a prediction of what they think might happen? What do you think? So if we don't blow very much, it sort of depends on how much air we blow into it. So, yeah. What do you think? Maybe it'll be like sort of trapped inside of it somehow? Excellent. Any other thoughts? We'll find out. So David's again using this marver. The marver is that stainless steel table. We use that to shape the glass. It also cools the outside so that we get sort of like a skin on it that's easier to hold its shape. So he's got a little bubble so far. He's going to go back in for another gather of glass. That just adds more glass over top of it. The larger an object that we're working with, the more gathers of glass we'll have right on top of each other. Not really. It's about like blowing up a balloon. Yeah. So David's going to go into the hot sculpting mode of this piece. It'll still be really, really hot, so no, unfortunately. It'll probably be kind of sharp, too. So, are you guys ready for the bubble? Let's see what happens when we blow this up. So David's done what we call capping off. So you'll notice that his thumb, he'll blow air into it. Whoa, there we go. So you notice that, yeah. Cool. Yeah. Excellent. What are some other questions that you guys have about the hot shop, about some of the equipment that you see around here? Yeah. So these color things right here are color bar. This is a color rod or a color bar. This is how we add color to the pieces of glass that we're working with. Now, when we were working in the classroom, we created two different chemicals, right? On the copper plate, we created cupric oxide. That's that green material that we made when we rusted the copper. And on the steel sheet, we made ferric oxide or iron oxide, that red color, right? Those heavy metal oxides are a really good source of colors or pigments for different materials, especially for paint and for glass. So this orange probably has quite a bit of cadmium oxide or some other related chemical like that. This is produced already, so we don't have to actually mess with all of those chemical powders because we don't want to breathe those in, and it makes for a really dirty, messy hot shop too. We want to keep our studio nice and clean. So if that powder gets up in the air, it would wind up showing up on a lot of our different pieces of glass. So we take this piece of colored rod, we heat up small sections of it, and then we apply it to a bubble of clear glass that David might be creating or making. So we can use it in this form, this color rod. We can also actually make it into small little chips called frit. This frit is another way that we can add to it. We take a gather of glass, we roll it into this frit while it's hot, and it creates almost like a little speckled pattern. We can grind that up even smoother to create a powder. And that powder we can dust on or even draw on the powder and then pick it up with a hot gather of glass. So David's got another gather going on a blowpipe over there. And you'll see him use a wooden block. So this wooden block has been soaking in a bucket of water, and that for us is really helpful because it creates a small barrier of steam between the wooden block and the glass itself. That makes a really smooth, perfect surface of the glass. There's no scratches, no indentations from the wooden block. But once we get that wooden block wet, we have to keep it wet all the time. If it's out of the water, it'll dry out and start to crack and break, and we won't be able to use it anymore. Glass blowers use that wooden block to shape and form the glass so it's the exact shape that they want to work with. There are very big blocks, there are very small blocks, and then everything in between. Some blocks are very big. So one of the questions was, what happens if you suck in instead of blow out on that bubble? It is possible. It is hot air that you're breathing in, but there are actually techniques where you do suck in order to create a double-walled vessel or something where it sinks in the inside of the glass. That's a pretty advanced technique. I've never done it, so I don't know much about it. David, have you ever done the suck in? Have you ever sucked in? Yeah, I've never done it. Yeah. But that's like for double-walled things, right? Well, we'll give it a shot. David will do that. Let's see that. Okay. Any other questions? What are some other questions you guys have? Yeah. Do I like? I don't make a lot of glass myself, but every time I've made glass, I've really, really enjoyed it. I know David's been doing this for 10 years. Almost 10 years. David loves glass, and he's worked really hard, both as a student, where he had the chance to do this as a school student at his. Did you start at Jason Lee? Yeah. So he started in middle school and then continued. He was here in Tacoma. There are a couple of different programs that start at age 12 or so, and he's continued on and even gone to places like Pilchuck, the glass school just north of Seattle, in order to learn more from other artists. So it takes a lot of practice. A lot of glass artists talk about being bit by the glass bug. Ooh, yeah. So, oh, cool. Isn't that cool? What's that? So you have to have a bubble first in order to make the sucky roll. I don't know. I've never. So how do we twist? Excellent. Well, I don't want to add any color, but we can do some cane. You want to do like a flat piece and twist? Yeah. All right. So. Yeah, this will take just a second. I'm going to put the microphone down for a second while we get. wind up having two separate, they would still have a wall in between. Yeah. Excellent question. So the question was, what's the difference between the furnace and the glory hole? So the furnaces actually have a small container, a bowl inside of the furnace that holds all of that hot glass. So when we open that up, it's a big shell, a big kiln, an oven, and then inside of that is a pot of hot glass, all at about 2100 degrees. The glory holes, or the reheating chambers, those are more like a barrel. There's nothing inside of them. It's almost like a barrel on its side that just has fire. So you can see the diagram on top and how that's quite a bit different. So there's no actual hot molten glass inside of the reheating chamber. Yeah. So what makes it the hottest is that we have the natural gas. We control how much natural gas is blowing into each the furnace and the glory hole, and we can adjust that with computer controls to make sure that it stays at that temperature. So we can regulate how much fire goes in there and how hot it gets. Okay. What else? Yeah. Who's got a question? Yes. Yeah. So do we get, we do get paid every now and then to actually blow glass. Glass blowers themselves, mini glass artists, some work for studios where they actually produce artwork for other artists and get paid that way. They often also produce their own work and sell either through galleries or through what we call commissions. A commission is when somebody says, hey David, I'd like you to make something for me. And David would say, sure, let's agree to that. I'd like you to make me a blue cup. And David says, hey, I've got this blue cup right here. Wouldn't you like to buy it? So we make those sorts of deals. Every artist is a little bit different. Some do production, where they make the same object over and over and over again. Some people make artworks that are one by one, and they don't make series. It all depends on the artist. Every artist is different. Every artist has their own way of doing it. So, yes, ma'am. What's that? Oh, so what do we do with the leftover glass? Once this glass has been taken out of the furnace and it's been out here and touched the ground, it gets all sorts of dirt and sort of, dust and chemicals and all sorts of stuff in it. So we actually can't use this anymore. So this glass, we just wind up tossing. It can't really be recycled because it's a different type of glass than what normal glass is made out of. It's a different chemical formula. There are times, and we have buckets next to both of our furnaces, the clear glass that hasn't been damaged by anything, that hasn't been exposed to any chemicals or dust or dirt or grime, that we can reuse and actually recycle ourselves. So, good question. Yes? Yeah, so that's one of the furnaces. And oh, so the question was, would the hot glass stick to something like the floor here? And it sort of depends on how hot the glass is, but in general, no, it won't. And that's because glass likes to stick to itself, and it likes to stick to things that are a little bit more porous. So here, even when we get little bits of hot glass, most of the time they come right off. They will stick to things like the furnace doors and the glory hole doors, so we have to be careful not to accidentally bump the doors, because in that case, it's very sticky. As soon as that hot glass hits the furnace door, it sticks. And that can cause a really big problem down the road. If we do it in the wrong spot, that can actually glue our doors shut, and that makes everybody very unhappy. Good question. Yes, sir. To make strong glass? It sort of depends what you mean by strong glass. Usually for an art object, the things that we make, some days it may take all day to make one work of art. Sometimes if it's more production, if we have a plan and we know we're making a lot of the same things, we can make 15 or 20 during a day. It sort of depends on the object itself. The strength of the glass comes from its thickness and from how well it's formed and how well it's made fitting together. So there are different ways that we can make it stronger or more delicate and brittle. So good question. It's a complicated answer though, because it all depends on the object. So, any other questions? Somebody I haven't heard from in a while. Yeah. So this thing right here, these things are called yokes. And these yokes help us by actually holding on to our blowpipes and our punties while we're working on it. That way, yeah, I'll show them in a second. If you want to just show them a yoke. Actually, it's exactly like what David was using right here. It just happens to be on wheels, so we can roll it closer or further away from the glory hole. We're down to about 3 minutes, by the way. So David's come over with another gather of glass on a little punty. Let's see what he comes up with. Again, using those tweezers, it's a really handy-dandy tool. So the tweezers are often used for what we call hot sculpting. This is where we take a hot gather of glass and we sculpt it by just twisting and moving that glass around. There are a lot of different ways to form glass. Sometimes we use various types of molds that we can actually push or blow the glass into. We also use things called a diamond shear. Diamond shears are really cool. That's the tool that David has in his hand right now. They're sort of like scissors, but they have sort of like a claw type opening, and they actually have a little diamond shaped hole in the middle of them. That helps us grab the glass and we can actually pull it and move it however we'd like. Yeah. So David's made a little piggy out of glass. Like David said, it takes about 2 minutes for the glass to become cool enough where it doesn't move anymore. It's incredibly hot right now, and it also has to anneal. So we have to put this into a kiln and let it cool down, usually over the period of about 24 hours. If we don't do that, it could spontaneously crack, pop, and explode. Other questions? What's that? Yeah. Yeah, unfortunately, it's very hot and it takes a while to cool down. So it cools, we put them in different things called annealing ovens, and we have 4 of them here in the hot shop. They're actually labeled too. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4. So those annealing ovens, for a large piece of glass, we put them in there while they're still hot. We take them right off of the blowpipe or the punty, put them directly in there. It has a soak temperature of about 900 degrees, so it comes down to 900 degrees, it soaks for a while, and then cools the rest of the way. Usually that takes about 24 hours. For larger works of art, especially for cast glass, that can take up to 10 to 12 days here. Some of the really big pieces of cast glass, including mirrors for telescopes. The largest piece of glass that's ever been made was a mirror for a very large telescope. It took 3 years for that glass to cool down. And they do that in order so there's no breaks, no cracks, nothing going on inside the glass. All right, there's a picture of that giant mirror, actually. Pretty cool, right? So glass has lots of really amazing applications. Yes, ma'am? The 2 furnaces run 24/7. They've been running for about 6 or 7 years now. So those are the two furnaces with the doors. The glory holes, we turn those off every night. We have to make sure that the furnaces keep running. If the glass cools down, it creates all sorts of problems. It's bad for the furnace, it's bad for the glass. It can be really dangerous because of that lack of annealing. So those we shut off only when we need to do repairs. Excellent. Elizabeth is here. You guys are all done with the hot shop. Thank you so much. Good to see you guys. You guys learned some cool stuff?